Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the candlelit corridors of ancient China, where the flicker of lanterns reflects off pools of liquid silver, and emperors sit on jade thrones, sipping death disguised as medicine. You're standing at the edge of a grand marble chamber, the air thick with incense where courtiers whisper of eternal life, and alchemists present their shimmering creations with trembling hands. One of those creations, as it turns out, is Mercury. Actual Mercury. The stuff you're not supposed to touch, let alone drink. But here it's divine. Here it's medicine. And here it's quietly killing people who think they're getting younger. You probably won't survive this story either, at least not without shaking your head a few times. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere around the world, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in a room that feels more dream than palace. You're somewhere in the early centuries BCE. Stone pillars rise around you, carved with symbols you don't understand, but instinctively respect. A silk-robed emperor leans forward, his pupils wide with a hunger that isn't quite sane, and a silver bowl is brought forth on a golden tray. Inside a churning silvery liquid glimmers mercury, though they call it liquid metal of the gods. You watch as he raises the bowl with ceremonial slowness. No one dares breathe. He drinks. The silence deepens. Then he nods. The courtiers erupt into praise. You try not to gag just watching. It's a strange moment. Sacred, terrifying, and common. This isn't a one-time ritual, it's a pattern across centuries. Over and over, Chinese rulers, powerful men with armies and scholars at their disposal, chose to drink mercury on purpose, often for years. You wander deeper into this glittering, poisonous world and find that mercury wasn't just a royal obsession, it was a philosophical one. In Taoist cosmology, things weren't always what they seemed. The boundaries between life and death, substance and spirit were porous. Mercury, with its alien sheen and strange, ever-moving body, seemed like a miracle in itself. How could something so beautiful be dangerous? Of course, from your modern perspective, it's screamingly obvious. Mercury's toxic effects are well known today: tremors, memory loss, organ failure, insanity. But 2,000 years ago, none of that was part of the conversation. Instead, the metal was admired for its mysterious behavior, able to divide and reunite, to shimmer like moonlight and never rot. In a world without modern chemistry that felt immortal, you picture the palace physicians watching with forced smiles, knowing they had to nod along. Some of them, to be fair, probably believed in the powers of Mercury. Others, they were likely just hoping not to get beheaded. The court was not exactly Yelp review friendly. What's quietly haunting is how Mercury became a stand-in for hope. Hope that life didn't have to end. Hope that there was a loophole to aging. Hope that the body could be tricked, even rewritten by the right combination of divine substances. Mercury was viewed as transformation in a bowl, and in fairness, it did transform the people who drank it. Just not in the direction they expected. Some historians still argue whether the elite truly believed in Mercury's powers, or if it was partly political theater. When your emperor is swallowing poison and calling it salvation, do you correct him? Or do you reach for your own cup? The story gets stranger when you realize it wasn't just a one-time mistake. Multiple dynasties fell into this trap. Even when previous rulers keeled over, foaming at the mouth, their successors often did the same thing. The records say things like, His Majesty was taken to the heavens after consuming the sacred pill, which is a poetic way of saying he poisoned himself on Tuesday. You glance again at the bowl in the emperor's hand. The mercury inside barely moves, yet it gleams like a captive moon. It's easy to imagine how someone might believe it holds secrets. After all, how could something so silken and strange not be magical? You imagine the servants tasked with grinding cinnabar, the red ore from which mercury is extracted. Their hands are stained, their breaths shallow. They work in silence, maybe believing they're preparing medicine. Maybe suspecting they're preparing a funeral. And still the emperor smiles. Still the court applauds. Still another drop of death is swallowed in pursuit of a dream no one has ever lived long enough to verify. And so begins your descent into this gleaming madness. You haven't even left the palace gates, and already the scent of Mercury clings to your clothes. You're following him now, the emperor that is. His silk robes sweep along the polished stone floor, heavy with embroidery, heavier still with expectation. This man rules a continent-sized kingdom. He commands armies, rewrites laws, reshapes mountains. And yet, what he truly wants is the one thing no general can win for him forever. You trail him into a smaller chamber, if smaller still means a room the size of a cathedral. Scrolls line the lacquered walls, and a smoky brazier bubbles in the center, stirring the air with the scent of pine resin and something sharper. An old man stands by the flame's eyes, glassy with fervor. An alchemist. He bows low and presents a tiny jade vial. The emperor nods. The vial is uncorked, and again there's that telltale glimmer. You're witnessing the second act of a strange, slow tragedy, the firm belief that immortality could be swallowed one silver sip at a time. This particular emperor, let's call him every emperor because this story repeats so often, is just the latest in a long parade of rulers obsessed with never dying. He's read the Taoist classics and he knows the lore. There is a pill, a potion, a mixture somewhere in this world that grants eternal life. It's hidden in sacred mountains, whispered about in clouds, guarded by spirits. And until it's found, Mercury will have to do. You sit cross-legged beside the flame and you watch him drink. The logic here, if you can call it that, comes partly from Taoism's more esoteric branches. You might remember the idea of external alchemy, where followers sought to create physical substances that mirrored the harmony of the universe. The right blend of elements, carefully refined, could supposedly bring the body into balance with the cosmos. Once you achieved that harmony, you could transcend death. Mercury, with its strange ability to flow like water, but reflect like metal, seemed ideal. Combine it with sulfur orbits of stars' dragon bones, and philosophical musing, and suddenly you've got yourself an immortality elixir. Or as we call it today, a neurologically devastating substance with bonus renal failure. You're trying to imagine how these people justified it to themselves. Maybe it's a little like modern superfoods, but instead of drinking a kale smoothie and convincing yourself your chakras are aligned, they were boiling down cinnabar and trusting it would align their soul with the Tao. Historians still debate whether these emperors believed the potions would grant literal immortality or just spiritual elevation. Maybe they thought the body would die but the soul would ascend. Or maybe after enough decades surrounded by flatterers and silk cushions, they stopped believing death could really apply to them at all. The odd part is some effects of Mercury can feel strangely otherworldly at first. In small doses, Mercury exposure can cause euphoria, a sensation of floating, vivid dreams. So an emperor might take a potion and feel energized, even enlightened. Of course, that high is usually followed by muscle tremors, slurred speech, and eventually the brain forgetting how to control the lungs. But still, the first dose is dreamy, and if you're a ruler already surrounded by mystics and astrologers, any strange physical sensation can be spun into proof. Are your hands shaking? That's the body shedding mortal constraints. Are your pupils dilated? You're opening your inner eye. Are you vomiting blood? The impurities are leaving your system. Don't stop now. You reach for one of the scrolls. Its silk has browned at the edges, but the calligraphy is still precise, elegant. The passage explains that true immortality is found not in fear of death, but in accepting that you are already one with the universe. That your essence is eternal if only your body can be properly prepared. To prepare the body, you ingest mercury. You start to see the feedback loop. The more the emperor drinks, the worse he feels, but the worse he feels, the more he believes he's transforming. After all, real change is supposed to be uncomfortable, right? Meanwhile, his court physicians are stuck in a moral no-man's land. Some genuinely believe the elixirs work. Others don't, but can't say so without losing their heads. So they hedge. They add herbs, dilute the dosage, offer supportive tonics. It's like watching someone leap off a cliff and trying to pad the rocks below with leaves. You think about how today's billionaires chase longevity through cryotherapy and gene editing. Maybe things haven't changed as much as we'd like to think. Replace jade vials with biotech, and you've got the same story-powerful people refusing to accept that they're human. At some point, the Emperor begins ordering even more of the potion. His face grows paler, but he swears he sees spirits in his dreams. Now beautiful figures beckoning him to join them in the clouds. His servants say nothing. The court records don't mention the shaking hands or the nights he can't sleep because his gums are bleeding. They just note that His Majesty is growing ever closer to heaven. And as you follow him down another corridor, you see a mural. A painted scroll unrolled along the wall, showing a glowing figure ascending toward the stars. Silver light streaming from his palms. Below, kneeling alchemists hold up trays of mercury. The scene is triumphant. You know better. That man probably died drooling on his robe. But here he's immortal. You're somewhere quieter now, a small courtyard, tucked behind a temple complex far from the grandeur of the imperial palaces. Here the air smells of pine needles and crushed stone. A fountain burbles gently, and beside it, under the mottled shade of an ancient ginkgo tree, an old man squats over a bowl. He's not a priest. Not officially. He's an alchemist of the wandering sort. The kind who drifts from province to province with a sack of tools and 1,000 recipes written from memory. His robe is singed at the hem. His eyes are twitchy. But his hands move with reverence. Tonight he's decided to test a new formula on himself. You crouch nearby, careful not to interrupt. This is a rare ritual. Not because it's unusual, but because few have the courage or foolishness to try the mixture without a sponsor. Most alchemists offered their elixirs to nobles. This man trusts only himself. You glance at the bowl. It glows faintly red. Not metaphorically, the cinnabar residue inside gives it a mineral shimmer that catches the dying light. The alchemist hums a little as he pours in a silvery thread of pure mercury, followed by powdered jade, dried centipede, and... Is that crushed pearl? The scent is oddly sweet, metallic, and floral like perfume left out in a thunderstorm. He stirs, then drinks, one long, unblinking swallow. At first, nothing. He stays still. Then his shoulders twitch. His eyes flutter. And then he starts to convulse. You freeze. There's no priest to help. No courtiers to pretend this is progress. Just a man who genuinely believed his brew would transport him into some higher plane and is now collapsing on a mossy stone. The symptoms come quickly, tremors frothing at the mouth eyes rolling back. Mercury poisoning can take its time when taken in low doses, but this was a feast. A direct path to the underworld, no detours. You sit beside him as the spasms fade. There's no drama, no thunder or divine light. Just silence broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain. What's bizarre is that this wasn't considered a failure in the way you might think. To other alchemists, the man's death would be seen as proof he was close, that his formula nearly worked. Some might even believe he did ascend, and that his body's collapse was just a husk sloughing off like a cicada, leaving its shell behind. Historians still argue whether these solo experiments were acts of sincere belief or quiet desperation. After all, few of these men were rich. Their best shot at success, fame, wealth, peace was to find the elusive recipe that worked. And every failure was still a step forward, unless it was your last one. You take a slow breath. The body beside you is still. But the notes he left behind scratched into bamboo slips remain. You pick them up and read phrases like essence of moonlight toad oil of the western river and soul-binding silver. It reads more like poetry than chemistry, yet this is what passed for science here. Oddly, many of these notes are echoed in later records. You'll see ingredients like simmered mercury spirit toad, or immortal fungus popping up in imperial court recipes centuries later. Which means someone took this seriously. Someone somewhere looked at this man's notes and thought, let's try it with deer antler next time. You reflect on the nature of alchemy in ancient China. It wasn't purely about metals or medicine. It was a fusion of metaphysics, cosmology, medicine, and dream logic. Mercury wasn't just a material, it was a bridge, a way to straddle the visible and invisible worlds. Its instability, its glow, its refusal to behave at all felt symbolic of the immortal soul trying to break free. You find it strangely beautiful in a tragic way. And then, of course, you remember this wasn't fringe. Elixirs like this were routinely brewed for emperors, monks, warlords, and anyone else with the gold to pay. Some had small doses, some had rather too much. One particularly infamous case, a Tang dynasty prince, who insisted on drinking only elixirs that contained refined mercury with gold leaf. He believed that by layering precious substances he could strengthen his soul and purify his body. He died at 27 after a 2-week hallucination where he claimed to be turning into a tiger. Some scholars suggest he might have had mercury-induced psychosis. Others think he was just high on centuries of mythology. Either way, the end result was the same one more glittering name on the long list of dreamers poisoned by their own hope. You look back down at the courtyard. The ginkgo leaves sway gently. The body is still there, cooling. In time, someone will find him. They'll bury him with his tools, maybe copy a few of his notes. His name won't make it into many official histories, but somewhere in the footnotes of Taoist alchemical texts you might find a reference to the Wandering Jade Brewer or Silent River Master, a man who flew too close to the silver flame. And what's eerie is despite the failure, no one will question the method. They'll just refine the recipe. You're in a tomb now, but not just any tomb. This is the colossal underground world of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, and the undisputed poster child of dying in the most expensive, over-the-top, mercury-soaked way imaginable. You can't see everything, of course. Much of his tomb is still sealed, buried beneath a hill in Shanxi province. But even the parts we have uncovered, the terracotta warriors, the war chariots, the musicians frozen in clay mid-song, are enough to make your jaw go slack. This place isn't a tomb, it's an empire-sized hallucination. And beneath it all, if ancient texts are to be believed, flows a river. Not a metaphorical river. A literal one crafted from pure liquid mercury set to ripple eternally through miniature mountains of bronze and jade. The emperor, they say, wanted to sail through the afterlife on silver waves. You peer into the darkness and imagine it a map of China recreated underground, threaded with deadly metal rivers shimmering in torchlight. Qin Shi Huang didn't want to leave the world. He wanted to take it with him. It's excessive, it's absurd, and in its own diluted way, it's brilliant. Now you step back in time to the final years of his reign. The emperor is aging, not gracefully, not quietly. He's becoming increasingly paranoid, obsessed with omens plagued by dreams of assassination, and surrounded by advisors who would rather die than deliver bad news. What's a man to do when he fears death more than war? You guessed it, drink more mercury. The court alchemists trained in Taoist lore and well-versed in survival politics offer him the pill of immortality. Small, glimmering, and expensive. Mercury-based with just enough gold or cinnabar to make it feel spiritually upscale. He drinks it. Then he drinks another. And soon it becomes routine. He starts taking these pills every day like a man popping breath mints before meeting the gods. Historians still debate how much the emperor understood about what he was ingesting. Did he believe the alchemist completely? Was he skeptical but desperate? Or was it a toxic combination of both suspicion mixed with fatal hope? There's a theory still debated that Qin Shi Huang didn't just want to live forever. He wanted to transcend. He believed he could become something more than human. The mercury was the ticket and immortality was the train. He just didn't realize it was headed straight off a cliff. As his symptoms worsened, tremors, confusion, increasing aggression, he became more determined. He ordered voyages across the Eastern Sea in search of the Penglai Islands' mythical lands where immortals were said to live. These were real expeditions, mind you. Ships, sailors, hundreds of people, sent off to find magical islands that may have been lifted from someone's fever dream. They never returned, which honestly was probably the right move. Back at court, things got worse. The emperor's mood grew erratic. His decisions, once calculated, became reactive and violent. Some scholars argue that mercury poisoning played a direct role in his later paranoia. And when he finally collapsed during a tour of eastern China, the court panicked. He died most likely of mercury-induced organ failure. His body began to decompose immediately in the summer heat, and rather than announce his death, his ministers strapped his corpse into a chariot, filled it with fish to cover the smell, and kept traveling. The world couldn't know the emperor had fallen. It's darkly comedic in a grotesque way. The man who tried so hard to conquer death ended up rotting in a carriage full of carp, but his tomb, his mercury kingdom, was still waiting. Modern researchers have detected abnormally high mercury levels in the soil around the unexcavated burial site, lending weight to the ancient claims. It's a terrifyingly poetic image, a world ruled by a man who drank poison to live forever, buried in a lake of the very thing that killed him. You lean on a stone rail and look into the cavernous dark. Was it madness? Belief a cult of personality gone too far? Historians can't agree. And maybe that's fitting. Qin Shi Huang didn't just want immortality, he wanted ambiguity. He wanted to be remembered as a legend, not a man. In that at least he succeeded. You're standing in a garden now, but it's not for strolling. This one's carved in strict symmetry, rows of scholars' rocks. Plum blossoms and gently raked gravel meant to reflect the cosmic balance of the universe. The air hums with quiet intensity. This is where philosophy meets obsession. You've landed in the heart of a belief system that made Mercury not just tolerable, but sacred wuxing, or the five faces. No, not some new age dietary cleanse, this was a foundational Chinese worldview. Everything seasons, organs, flavors, planets, even emotions was mapped to a 5-part cycle: wood, fire, earth, metal, water. Mercury, it slid somewhere between metal and water. Slippery, hard to pin down? Just like death, just like immortality. A robed scholar stands beside you, eyes closed in thought, explaining in soft tones how the world doesn't operate in straight lines but in cycles. Life flows into death. Death flows into transformation. So it stands to reason, he says, that if you can master the cycle, if you can balance the phases, you can step outside it. It sounds nice in a terrifying kind of way. You peek into his satchel and spot a tiny stoppered bottle. Of course, mercury again. Here it isn't just a potion. It's a philosophical material, a kind of liquid yin-yang. Always moving, never decaying, unpredictable and pure. In Taoist alchemical texts, it's often called the essence of true metal, or spirit of transformation. Fancy words for something that to you still screams brain damage. He's not trying to die. He's trying to resonate with the cosmos. The belief goes like this: by consuming substances that align with certain elements or energies, you harmonize your inner world with the outer one. Mercury, with its unnatural movement and glow, feels like it must come from some higher place. Combine it with the right minerals and timing, say, a full moon in late spring, and you're not just swallowing goo. You're ingesting order, divinity, the frequency of heaven. Historians still debate how much of this was metaphor versus literal practice. Some argue that the more respected schools of Taoism viewed these alchemical recipes as symbolic, meant for meditation or ritual, not actual ingestion. Others insist that no, they really thought mercury helped you defy decay. And while the elite may have had the luxury of contemplating immortality down at the village level, the logic trickled down literally. Mercury began appearing in folk remedies, rubbed into wounds, mixed into ointments, given in microscopic doses to cool the blood or calm the spirit. No one thought to ask cool it into what calm it. Forever. You're beginning to notice a pattern. Mercury across every level of Chinese society, from emperors to hermits, was never viewed as neutral. It was always either miraculous or malevolent, but rarely mundane. It never just was. You glance at the garden pond now, where tiny ripples form around a floating leaf. The scholar points to it. You see, he whispers. Movement without effort. That is the Tao, the way. You nod. You don't mention that Mercury also moves that way, smooth, eerie, effort-free, right before it enters your bloodstream and starts dismantling your organs. There's something heartbreakingly human in all of this. The desire to live forever isn't new, but the Chinese alchemical pursuit wrapped it in silk scrolls and celestial charts. It made the grotesque look graceful. Poison became philosophy. Madness became method. There's even a school of thought that connects Mercury's behavior, its refusal to solidify its strange luster, to the immortal spirit itself. Just as Mercury never quite settles the soul, too was believed to continue long after the body faded. By ingesting mercury, one was not simply preserving flesh, but tuning into the immortal principle. The body might weaken, but the essence that could shine brighter. And just when you think it couldn't get weirder, a record from the Han Dynasty mentions a practice of feeding mercury to cranes. Yes, birds. Because cranes symbolized longevity, and it was thought that by consuming mercury-laced feed, the cranes would live longer, and those who watched them might learn something cosmic. The cranes did not live longer. They probably died confused and shiny. You walk through the stone garden paths, your feet crunching gently on gravel arranged to mimic the Milky Way. Every rock, every ripple has meaning here. And yet somehow, that meaning keeps turning back to the same shimmering metal. You pass a prayer slip tied to a pine branch, written in neat characters as a simple wish to be beyond time. Maybe that's all it ever was, the whole thing. Every drop, every pill, every emperor, every hermit, every scholar who ever uncorked a mercury vial. They just wanted out of the clock, and in trying to outsmart time, they ran headlong into a faster death. You're back indoors now, though. Indoors doesn't quite capture the suffocating atmosphere of this place. It's an alchemical workshop tucked into a temple annex, or maybe an abandoned mountain house, thick with smoke and secrets. The walls are stained black with soot. The ceiling's so low you keep ducking even though you don't need to. And the air, it bites. There's a furnace in the corner glowing red and alive. You can hear it breathing. No, really, it wheezes and exhales as bellows work, tirelessly operated by a boy who's already missing 3 fingernails. Across the room, 2 alchemists lean over a ceramic crucible. One holds a long iron spoon. The other fans incense and mutters incantations meant to keep the spirits from interfering. This is where the magic and the madness happens. They're distilling cinnabar, a brilliant red ore that looks like powdered ruby, but hides something much more lethal, mercury sulfide. When heated, it transforms into pure liquid mercury. You get the sense these two have done this before. Their motions are practiced, efficient, and just a little desperate. You watch as the cinnabar powder begins to bubble. Then comes the shimmer the moment the metallic drops appear, rolling like alien marbles across the surface of the pan. They're beautiful. You hate how beautiful they are. One of the alchemists carefully scrapes the beads into a jade cup. The other's nose is bleeding, but he doesn't notice or care. This whole process is what the Taoist texts call refining the essence. It's a ritual as much as a science. Fire is the transformer mercury, the spirit. Heat it too little and the elixir is impure. Too much, and it's angry. That's the word they use. Angry mercury. As if the metal has moods. Maybe after enough years watching it kill people, you'd believe it does. You peek at a nearby manuscript scrawled in hasty brushstrokes on silk. It reads like part recipe, part prayer. 3-part cinnabar 1 of dragonbone heat beneath the stars whisper thrice. There's a footnote that simply reads, "Do not look directly into the flask." Okay then, you're starting to get the idea that alchemy was half chemistry, half theater. The bubbling, the chanting, the herbs thrown in at odd angles, it's not entirely about results. It's about presence, mystery, power. For the client watching from the shadows, the nobleman or minor official paying for this brew, it looks convincing. And maybe if they believe it hard enough, it works. For a while. Historians still debate whether the alchemists truly believed in their concoctions, or if they knew they were treading the edge of poisoncraft. Some texts include disclaimers like, "for spiritual use only," or "avoid ingestion in summer," which makes you wonder. And yet, these recipes were copied over generations. That doesn't happen unless someone thinks they matter. You look at the tools scattered around pestles, cauldrons, glass tubes shaped like question marks. Everything is blackened at the edges, a little warped from use. One bowl is lined with gold leaf, not for decoration, but because gold was thought to calm the mercury. Keep it tame. As if gilding a crocodile would make it nap. And there's the irony. Mercury was often paired with gold in these recipes, not just for alchemical reasons, but also symbolic ones. Gold doesn't tarnish, mercury doesn't decay. Together they were seen as divine opposites, one solid, one liquid. One eternal, one elusive. Kind of like the body and the soul. In one corner you spot a small bottle sealed with wax and marked with the character for longevity. It's glowing faintly. Probably radioactive. You don't touch it. The boy with the missing fingernails offers you tea. You decline. He shrugs and drinks his, and you suddenly realize the fumes in here are probably worse than the potions themselves. You think of all the lives shortened by this room by dozens like it all across ancient China. And not just emperors, the makers suffered too. The furnace exhales again and so do you. It's worth noting that some alchemists did begin to notice the effects. Records mention a few who went blind, lost control of their limbs, or started speaking nonsense after prolonged exposure. Some believed it was a sign of spiritual breakthrough. Others took it as punishment for botched formulas. No one ever said we should stop doing this. Instead, they tweaked the recipes, lowered the doses, added herbs like ginseng or licorice root softeners, they called them. Of course, none of these countered Mercury's toxicity, but they did make the mixture look more medicinal. Appearances counted for a lot. You wipe a thin film of silver dust from your sleeve. It's everywhere now in the air, on the walls, and your lungs, probably. This is what ambition smells like in this era: burned minerals and incense blood and metal. A laboratory by way of Dante, the alchemists pour the finished mixture into a stoppered ceramic vial and tuck it into a silk-lined box. Tomorrow they'll present it to their patron with humble bows and grand claims. And that man, whoever he is, will take a sip. Maybe two. And when his teeth begin to loosen, they'll say, it's the toxins leaving his body. You follow the vial now carried by lacquered, cart-cloaked servant and layers of velvet secrecy all the way to a palace pavilion, scented with sandalwood and rain-soaked peonies. This isn't a dusty laboratory anymore. This is elite territory. A place where every dish is carved from jade and every lie arrives on a silver tray. You're attending a banquet in the Tang Dynasty. Or perhaps the Song. It doesn't really matter. The pattern is the same: rich robes, richer plates, and somewhere in the mix, Mercury dressed up as medicine. They call it the golden pill. That's not metaphorical. It's an actual small sphere polished to a gleam containing cinnabar mercury powdered gems, and sometimes real gold leaf coated in honey or shaped into a pearl for that extra touch of immortality chic. And it's not just a one-off ritual. The golden pill has become a craze. Everyone wants one. Not just emperors anymore. Nobles, poets, retired generals, wealthy concubines. If you've got clout and a fondness for metaphor, you want that pill. Tonight's guest of honor is an aging minister. He's been coughing for weeks, possibly months. The court physicians say it's a lung imbalance. The monks say it's an omen. The alchemist says it's treatable with the pill, of course. He takes it after dessert. He doesn't make it to morning. You watch from a quiet corner hidden beneath a paper parasol. No one panics. No one cries. They merely drape a silk cloth over his face and whisper that he has transcended. Someone politely eats the rest of his dumplings. See, here's the strange truth. The golden pill wasn't always taken with fear. Often it was welcomed, revered, seen as a stepping stone, a divine lubricant to slide the soul out of its tired housing and into the realm of perfected beings. Especially when taken at the right moment during a full moon, a thunderstorm, or a significant birthday. Historians still argue whether users saw it as a literal key to eternal life or a symbolic way to die beautifully. Perhaps both. Maybe that's what made it so dangerously seductive. There's even poetry about it, verse after verse, praising the pill that melts sorrow, the drop of heaven, the silver flower that blooms within. You'd almost forget it causes convulsions, renal failure, and eventually a wildly unsuccessful afterparty with your ancestors. And yet the elite couldn't get enough. You wander through an archive and spot purchase records from entire provinces. Huge shipments of cinnabar realgar and mercury compounds sent to imperial courts. Some were meant for ingestion, others for topical use or incense or facial creams. Yes, mercury facials. No, they didn't work. You peer into a vanity mirror and imagine the palace ladies dabbing mercury paste under their eyes, believing it would preserve youth. The irony writes itself. Part of what fueled this craze was the way it blurred categories. Was the pill a medicine, a sacrament, a fashion statement? If you were dying anyway, wasn't it nobler to die glowing? One well-documented case comes from the Tang court, where a princess known for her beauty allegedly took a golden elixir every week to maintain her heavenly radiance. She developed skin lesions and began to hallucinate conversations with silkworms. When she passed, the palace eulogized her as ascending into starlight. Meanwhile, her handmaid who just drank water lived another 40 years. You sit now in a side chamber watching a physician mix another dose. He's muttering ratios 5 parts cinnabar, 1 part mercury dried lotus flower to bind the soul. He adds a flake of gold leaf like it's seasoning. Then he smiles. The smile of a man who knows he's selling bottled poetry. Maybe death, probably both. Even as word spread of people dropping dead, shortly after taking the pill, the marketing evolved. But they were impure, they'd say. Their body wasn't ready. Or they took it at the wrong phase of the moon. It was never the pill's fault. It was yours, dear listener. You spot a scroll on the floor. A court record of side effects. They're written carefully but cautiously, in some cases tremors. In others, spirit flight followed by silence. That last one means coma. It's phrased like a lullaby. And here's the truly chilling part, even knowing the risk some elites still took it. Not in spite of the dangers, but because of them. There was a theatrical nobility in choosing your moment, your method, your elixir. To die sipping silver under a canopy of stars surrounded by rose incense and flute music felt poetic. Like controlling the uncontrollable. You can't help but wonder, was this ever really about living forever? Or was it about dying? Well, dying while feeling powerful, mysterious, even radiant. The banquet ends. The guests drift home. The minister's body is quietly wheeled away on a lacquered cart. No scandal, no shame. Just a gentle nod to the heavens and the sound of another bottle being unstoppered. The golden pill glimmers in the firelight, and you wonder who'll take the next one. You're walking through a garden now, a scholar's retreat somewhere deep in the southern mountains. The air smells like plum blossoms and old ink. Birds chirp. Bamboo rustles. It's peaceful in that overly curated way, like someone asked nature to dial it down for ambiance. A slender figure in flowing robes sits cross-legged on a stone bench brush, in hand scrolls beside him. He dips into ink pauses and then writes, "The pill does not extend life, it deepens it." He pauses again, stares at the mountains, and you get the sense he just made that up. But he believes it now. This is a Taoist scholar alchemist, the philosopher class of the elixir elite. Less cauldron smoke, more cosmological metaphors. Unlike the palace alchemists who were paid to produce results, or at least glittery byproducts, these guys concerned themselves with spiritual purification, symbolic transmutation, and deeply ambiguous footnotes. To them, mercury wasn't just a chemical, it was a cosmic bridge. Something that spanned yin and yang body and spirit, earth and stars. They wrote entire treatises on how consuming mercury in microscopic doses mined you could refine the bones, dissolve worldly distractions, and anchor the ethereal soul. You read one scroll aloud, the body is a vessel. When the vessel is warmed by fire and filled with divine essence, it becomes a jade tower that does not rot. Historians still debate whether that's metaphor mysticism or just 9th century marketing. This section of history scholarly Taoist alchemy is both gorgeous and frustrating. You find gorgeously illustrated diagrams of energy channels and elixir fields on the human body, alongside extremely vague instructions like, stand on a turtle's back while facing the moon. Cool, but how? In these traditions, mercury was often combined with long regimens of breathing exercises, dietary restrictions, sexual abstinence, and meditative fasting. It wasn't just swallow and ascend. You had to prepare your body, align your spirit, quiet your cravings. One wrong bite of garlic and poof, immortality canceled. And yet even these elevated pursuits couldn't resist dabbling in the actual substance. Some texts list recipes that include dew collected from orchid petals at dawn ground mica, and you guessed it, mercury sulfide. The cinnabar was always there, glinting between the lines like a forbidden ingredient nobody could quite resist. You leaf through a silk-bound volume titled 10,000 Years of Stillness. Inside, you find the story of Master Xuanlong, a hermit alchemist, who lived atop a craggy peak for 70 years, meditated for weeks at a time, and eventually took a single dose of mercury-laced elixir during a solar eclipse. He reportedly glowed with serenity, then vanished into mist, or died, or ascended. Sources differ. That's the thing with these stories, they're deliberately slippery. Was Master Xuanlong a visionary who achieved something beyond death? Or was he just another man who mistook poisoning for progress? Modern historians can't agree. Some suggest these mystics did experience real neurological effects. Euphoria, hallucination, sense of detachment due to the Mercury's influence on the brain. A sort of chemically induced enlightenment. Others argue that the entire thing was spiritual placebo. If you believed hard enough, you transcended, at least in your mind. You sit by a koi pond now watching orange fish blink at you like judgmental elders. One of the scholar's students walks past carrying a mortar and pestle-powdered cinnabar clinging to his sleeves. He looks tired. Too much refining, not enough sleep. The scholar murmurs about the three treasures: Jing, essence, Qi, vital energy, and Shen, spirit. If Mercury could stabilize even one of those, he says it was worth the risk. After all, what's a little internal corrosion when eternity is on the table? But you can't help noticing the tremor in his hand, the faint shadow under his eyes, the way he leans a little too heavily on that carved cane, and the way his scrolls are beginning to blur, not because the ink is faded, but because his vision is going. Even at this level, the thoughtful, poetic symbol heavy tier of the alchemical world, the same patterns creep in. The body breaks down. The dose gets adjusted. The process continues. Still, these men weren't frauds. They believed. Deeply. Obsessively. And their writings show a strange kind of hope, not just for personal transcendence, but for a more perfect world. A world where time was optional, where illness dissolved like sugar in tea, where death was just a door and Mercury the key. You wander away from the bench. The wind rustles the trees. The scholar keeps writing, and you can't decide if he's chasing truth or just a very refined kind of delusion. You're deeper in the mountains now, and everything's gone quieter. No palace echoes, no scholar debates, just the hush of wind through pine and the low hum of crickets tucked into mossy crevices. You've arrived at a Taoist hermitage. Not the scroll-writing kind, the live-off locust and moonlight kind. Here, Mercury isn't just medicine, it's a ritual. A lean figure in rough robes stoops over a tiny stove, stirring something thick and crimson in a bronze vessel. The scent is sharp, part metallic, part sweet like old pennies soaked in plum wine. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His face says enough, serene, sun-darkened, missing a few teeth. You're in the presence of a true believer. This is the fringe edge of the Mercury movement, the spiritual survivalists of ancient China. They're not here to dazzle a court or scribble metaphors. They're here to become immortal, plain, and direct. You've heard the term before, internal alchemy. That's the polite version. The rougher reality is that some of these hermits were ingesting increasingly bizarre and toxic concoctions, made from mercury-lead arsenic and crushed minerals, convinced that if they just got the recipe exactly right, they'd unlock the final phase of transformation. A famous tale from the Tang Dynasty tells of a recluse named Liu Hanyuan, who supposedly survived 4 lightning strikes and credited his endurance to drinking the dragon's blood, his term for Mercury. Did he glow? Probably not. Did he survive the 5th lightning strike? That part's vague. You walk through the hermitage's sparse quarters, just stone slabs, dried herbs, bundles of bamboo slips. No luxury, no gold, just jars. Dozens of them. Some hold clear spring water, some hold ashes. One holds a swirling silvery liquid that seems to move even when the jar is still. You don't ask. You know what it is. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were. Some believe they were relatively rare, confined to a handful of wilderness mystics. Others argue they formed a vital thread of Taoist experimentalism laboratories in the mountains, as one put it. These men weren't crazy, they were testing reality, and they left behind records often cryptic but undeniably sincere. One text describes the process like this: ingest the red essence of earth. Breathe with the dragon's lungs. Wait until your body feels no weight, then walk through stone. Not great for lab replication, but deeply poetic, deeply haunted. You pick up a bundle of twigs tied with red string. Hidden inside is a bone sliver, etched with characters: "I burned my shadow and it fled screaming." You don't know what it means. You kind of hope no one does. Some of these mountain alchemists practiced corpse-preserving rituals. They believed that if the body remained intact long enough after death, especially if preserved by internal Mercury, the soul could re-enter and restart life, like a sort of cosmic reboot. Several tombs from the period have been discovered with abnormally well-preserved remains. Coincidence, maybe. Mercury, almost definitely. You sit on a rock ledge dangling over a ravine. The view is staggering mist-laced peaks like sleeping dragons, sunlight glinting off distant temple roofs. You wonder what it would feel like to believe this hard in anything. To risk your life sipping liquid metal not out of despair but hope. There's something oddly admirable about it. Misguided, yes. Often fatal, certainly. But also committed. These weren't casual dabblers. These were people who turned their entire lives into experiments. Every breath, every meal, every night spent staring at stars while Mercury slow danced in their bellies. One final tale floats to you on the breeze of a hermit who supposedly took no food for years, subsisting only on mercury elixirs and solar gazing. When he died, his followers claimed his body emitted a faint perfume. When unearthed, decades later, his skin was reportedly still supple like steamed dumpling dough. Historians are skeptical. You are too. But you also kind of want it to be true. Back in the hut, the old alchemist pours a small drop of silver liquid into a cracked bowl. He doesn't drink it. Not yet. He just stares at it, watching the way it catches the light. Listening maybe for a voice that only speaks in poison. You leave quietly. Let him have his moment. Let him believe. Because out here where the air tastes like pine and the stars feel closer than breath, the impossible doesn't seem that far away. The wind outside has picked up a low moaning hum around the abbey walls. You pause just long enough to tighten your robe. Cold finds every crack in these stone buildings, and it doesn't care how focused you are on a particularly tricky cue. Your ink has thickened slightly. It always does in this weather. The iron gall darkens with every degree the temperature drops. You give it a stir with a goose quill nub and mutter something uncharitable under your breath, a moment of unholy honesty in an otherwise pious afternoon. You sit back down and notice the tremble in your fingers. Not fear, not age, just cold. Cold that seeps into your bones, takes up residence in your knuckles, and makes each downward stroke feel like carving letters into stone. Monks endure this. You endure this. But really you'd rather not. Historians still argue whether scriptoria were intentionally kept chilly to preserve the ink, or simply because heating wasn't prioritized for scribes. Either way, your nose is running and your toes went numb before prime. As your eyes return to the page, you spot an ink blot. Just the tiniest smear near a capital B. It's fresh. And you already know who's responsible. Brother Ivo sneezes loudly behind you again. His hay fever is legendary a threat to any manuscript within a 3-yard radius. His sneezes have felled more decorative initials than Viking raids. You glance over and see his guilty shrug. The scribe's equivalent of a battlefield apology. You blot the smear gently and recopy the line. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. There's a strange kind of peace in knowing that error is a constant companion here. The candle nearest your desk has burned low, the wax pooling like some miniature melted cathedral. You lean in and relight it from your neighbor's flame. The gesture is quiet, but somehow communal. This whole place runs on little shared rituals. Today's project is a book of hours. The kind of thing wealthy nobles keep by their bedside luxury prayer manuals with golden initials and absurdly tiny script. The kind where Amen is the size of an ant. It's odd, isn't it? These books were never meant for public reading. No mass audience. No liturgical chanting. Just soft murmurs in private chapels whispered, while nobles lounge in fur robes. And yet you spend hours making sure every letter is perfect. Every loop on every L feels like it might decide the fate of the universe. You shift your posture again, trying to stretch out the knot in your spine. Monastic benches aren't built for comfort. They're designed to discourage falling asleep, which is ironic, considering how often you catch your brothers dozing with their foreheads in their hands. You once caught Brother Thad snoring mid-copy. His line read, "The Lord is gracious and full of..." then trailed off into a jagged ink line across the margin. You preserved it as a mark of divine intervention. Sometimes the cold is joined by damp. Rain creeps into the corners of the scriptorium and parchment swells like bread, left too long on the counter. The texture goes spongy, your pen snags, and suddenly your elegant Gothic S looks more like a spider that's given up on life. To counter this, the brothers sometimes press the folios between stones to keep them flat. It helps, but there's only so much even well-trained parchment can take. When it rebels, it does so with vengeance. You mutter a quiet prayer to St. Jerome, the patron of translators and scribes, and try again. As the bells chime for none, you realize your left elbow has fallen asleep. It's not a metaphor, it's just completely numb. But the page in front of you, it shines. A full column of text margins, tight ink crisp. The tiny letters are almost joyful in their stubbornness, like rows of ants marching in formation. You smile. Maybe only slightly, but it counts. The monks believed writing was a kind of spiritual battle. Each letter formed against resistance, against cold boredom, distraction, and physical discomfort. They weren't wrong. There's a fringe theory, half joke, half lore, that tiny handwriting was encouraged to stop monks from gossiping. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes down. It's almost believable. Especially after Brother Renard accidentally transcribed an entire psalm into the wrong book because he was busy whispering about the cook's oversalted stew. You think back to one particular winter when the ink froze in its pot. The whole scriptorium spent the morning holding their jars over small flame bowls, trying not to set their desks on fire. Brother Matthias succeeded in both warming his ink and accidentally igniting the corner of his sleeve. The manuscript survived. His robe did not. It's dark now. The lamplight flickers as shadows stretch across the room. The page in front of you wavers slightly, your eyes are tired. You blink hard and refocus. Just one more folio tonight. One more chance to whisper something permanent onto the page. Something so small, so careful that it might one day be read by someone with a magnifying glass and far too much free time. You're back in the palace now, but it's changed. No longer golden and bustling with youth. Now the corridors echo. Now the lacquer is chipped. The air smells of mildew and the eunuchs walk a little slower. Even the gold seems duller, like it's tired of reflecting all that ambition. You're in the final years of a dynasty, and in the emperor's private chamber you watch him reach slowly with trembling fingers for a small golden capsule. It's Mercury, of course. Again, still. This emperor, whose name we'll let blur a little for now because there were so many, has been taking immortality pills for years. Cinnabar-based, carefully blended, alchemically consecrated. He believes with full sincerity that they are what keep him alive. He also believes they are what will keep him alive forever, but the evidence is less encouraging. You notice the signs his speech is slurred, his eyelids twitch, he forgets the names of his concubines. Once during a ceremony, he waved at a bamboo pole thinking it was a visiting diplomat. No one corrected him. They never do. Historians still argue whether these late dynasty emperors were truly deluded or just terrified. Terrified of dying, of losing the mandate of heaven, of becoming another forgotten name, crushed beneath the weight of their ancestors. If swallowing Mercury kept those fears quiet for even a few nights, well, that was enough. But the dosage kept creeping upward. Always upward. Because that's the problem with immortality regimens, they're designed for the long haul. So, if the pills don't work, maybe you need more. Or stronger ones. Or ones infused under a specific constellation. The Emperor is offered a new formula today, one his physicians assure him has doubled its potency. It glows faintly unnaturally, he smiles, drinks, sighs. You follow him over the next few weeks. His behavior turns erratic. Sometimes he laughs at walls. Sometimes he shouts at ghosts. Sometimes he forgets that he's already executed someone and does it again just to be sure. His court is quiet about this, as always. They pretend not to notice when he no longer recognizes his seal. Or when he declares that the moon is trying to assassinate him. Or when he orders a dozen scholars to compose poems about the flavor of time. The Mercury is winning. By now this pattern is tragically familiar. From Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the very first emperor who sent expeditions to find the elixir, and died anyway, to later emperors who swallowed shimmering pills like candy, convinced that their own belief would bend biology. You pass a set of records hidden behind a carved screen. Inside, lists of symptoms, discreet notes from terrified physicians, secret orders to dispose of failed immortals. Some emperors were buried with their mercury pills. Some were buried because of them. And yet, the next ruler always tried again. Not just in China, of course. But here it reached a kind of fevered art. Each dynasty inherited the previous one's hopes and horrors, refined the formulas, upgraded the rituals, and died just the same. You kneel now beside the Emperor's jade bed. His eyes are clouded. He mumbles something about dragon bones and stars. A eunuch gently wipes his chin. The incense is thick and strangely sweet. You think it's masking something, perhaps the scent of organs giving up one by one. He breathes in. He does not breathe out. The next morning, the court announces that His Majesty has ascended to the heavens in purity. The pills naturally will be passed on to his heir, slightly modified, of course. Stronger, better. This time, it will work. You follow the coffin to the imperial tomb, past priests chanting of cosmic gates and Mercury rivers. When he is sealed away, so too are thousands of doses lovingly prepared. He may be dead, but hope is not. That's the great irony. Mercury, the element of change, always brings the same ending. And still the people bow. The drums sound, the alchemists sharpen their brushes. Because in the Empire's long story, death is just a comma. The next chapter is already brewing in a bronze pot beneath a flickering flame with a pinch of mercury and a prayer. The candles have guttered low again, and wax has puddled beside your elbow. You're not even sure when it happened. Time in the scriptorium has a funny way of folding in on itself like the loops of a letter G in your marginalia. You stretch your wrist, listen to the soft crackle of fire, and stare at the blank recto side of the next folio. You've moved on now from rubrication to layout planning. It sounds thrilling, doesn't it? Plotting invisible lines for future sentences, utter medieval madness, but this part. This is where the real artistry hides. You pull out your ruling tool, usually just a sharpened piece of lid or a stylus. Carefully, you begin scoring the page. Horizontal lines to keep your script straight, vertical margins for columns. These lines won't show in the final product, not if you're good at it. They're like scaffolding for a cathedral that gets taken down just before the Pope arrives. Mainstream historical consensus agrees this step was as essential as the script itself. Without these lines, your tiny writing would spiral off like an unhinged vine curling into chaos. And while monks were many things overly pious, underfed, lightly flammable, we were not chaotic. Well, except for Brother Tylo. He once ruled an entire folio upside down and didn't notice until 2 days later. That page is still buried in the back of the archive, the margins quietly mocking all who see them. Historians still argue whether layout practices were standardized across scriptoria or adapted to local quirks. You lean toward the second option after all your own monastery favors unusually wide outer margins, allegedly to leave space for future commentary. More likely it was because Brother Elias liked to doodle birds wearing bishop hats. Once the folio is ruled, you begin the careful process of outlining the columns. Depending on the manuscript's purpose, you may need 2 columns or just 1 for more luxurious texts. Pocket Bibles used double columns with famously tiny text, sometimes under 1 millimeter tall. Monks often used a magnifying lens for those. And you still lost your place. A lot. There's a myth that monks competed to see who could write the smallest script readable without a magnifying glass. If true, you suspect the prize was either dried apple slices or eternal bragging rights. Hard to say which was more valuable in 1273. You begin copying again, but this time it's a different kind of text. Not scripture, not commentary. This is an herbal manuscript. Descriptions of plants' remedies, occasionally a warning like, do not ingest more than 4 petals unless you wish to speak to angels prematurely. A sleepy part of you enjoys the shift. After hours of divine law, it's kind of refreshing to read about how to cure flatulence using crushed fennel and wine. A new kind of fatigue settles in now. Not the eye-throbbing weariness from too much close work, but the long, slow slide into dreamy repetition. Letter after letter. Ligature after ligature. You barely notice as your hand repeats the same rhythm. Your mind drifts elsewhere to what you'll eat tomorrow, to whether spring will come early this year, to whether anyone will ever actually read this. You chuckle. Quietly. A sound like parchment sighing. The whole paradox of your job is that you write for readers you will never meet and whose lives you cannot imagine. But somehow that makes it feel even more sacred. A relay across centuries hand to hand, one minuscule word at a time. You pause rubbing your wrist, then you blow softly on the last lines to help them dry. The ink is oak gall-based, very permanent, very corrosive over time. There's a joke among monks, Your letters will outlive your teeth. Honestly, it might be true. As you wait, you glance over at your neighbor's desk. Okay, he's working on the same herbal text, but he's illustrating. That's where the color happens. Little green vines, a wide-eyed mandrake root with a face like it's seen things. His pigments are ground from real minerals. Lapis, lazuli, malachite, even crushed bugs. It's like watching someone paint with powdered rainbows. You ask yourself, was this whole thing ever really just about writing small? No. Tiny script is the symptom. The root is something deeper: control, reverence, beauty. A belief that precision is a kind of worship. That God notices the tiniest thing: sparrows, mustard seeds, your slightly wonky M on line 6. You begin again. Letter by letter, you fall into the rhythm. The silence presses in gently but not oppressively. It's the kind of silence that lets your thoughts breathe. That gives space for wonder and for doubt. Historians still argue whether monks truly found peace in their routines, or if they just learned to call their exhaustion peace. You're leaning toward the former tonight. There's something oddly comforting about knowing your life is measured not in minutes but in lines, in letters, in strokes of a quill that hasn't been sharpened in far too long. You make a note to trim it later, after just one more column. You're in a library now. Not a modern one with humming lights and stern librarians, but a sprawling maze of bamboo slips and hand-inked scrolls, shelved behind silk curtains and guarded by sleepy scribes with ink-stained fingers. Welcome to the Imperial Archives, where the dead whisper through brushstrokes and the scent of wormwood and time seeps from every page. Here's where Mercury gets written into history sometimes, as science, sometimes as magic, and occasionally as both. One scroll lies open before you now. It's old, really old, and its surface is warped with humidity. But the calligraphy is steady, bold, confident. A medical classic from the Han Dynasty, perhaps, or an alchemical guide from the Tang. It reads like part recipe, part prayer, and entirely full of things you should probably not put in your body. This one calls for mercury mixed with powdered rhinoceros horn and deer gallbladder. It's said to pacify the internal dragons. You're not sure what the dragons are, but they don't sound pacified. You pass another scroll that warns against mixing mercury with garlic, may cause madness or spontaneous bleeding. A rare moment of caution. Yet a few slips later, another text cheerfully recommends a mercury face cream to brighten the complexion and soften the soul. There's even a margin note that says it helps with marital bliss. Historians still argue whether ancient scribes believed these formulas fully, or if they were just recording what others said, chroniclers more than advocates. Some documents read like first-hand endorsements. Others sound suspicious even to the authors who hedge their bets with phrases like, may extend life or if prepared under the correct moon. You pull another slip from a woven box. It's a letter between court officials debating how best to purify a particularly grumpy batch of mercury. One suggests heating it over sandalwood and chanting. The other proposes mixing it with child's urine. Their tone entirely professional, like they're discussing tea quality. And that's the weird beauty of it all. Mercury was not fringe, it was mainstream. Respected. Written into royal edicts passed down in encyclopedias and folded into family lore. Fathers gave it to sons, teachers to students. A dynasty's worth of wellness tips preserved in flowing black ink. Even in punishment records, mercury appears. One text recounts a traitor being forced to drink it, his soul sealed in silver. The cruelty isn't in the act, it's in the certainty that it worked. You walk deeper into the archive. The texts become more elaborate. Some are sealed in jade boxes, others wrapped in embroidered cloth. A multi-volume tome stands out bound in lacquered wood, its title etched in gold. The Complete Formulas for Attaining Transcendence. You open it slowly. Inside are hundreds of alchemical recipes. Some familiar, others wild. Mercury mixed with crane marrow. Mercury buried for 7 days beneath the corpse of a virgin ox. Mercury distilled through hollow coral into the tears of the moon. Each formula promises some version of not dying. Some even sketch diagrams, little human figures floating upward, arms, outstretched faces, serene. You can't help but notice that very few of them include Step 12. Don't die a horrible death from mercury poisoning. And still the writing is beautiful. You realize with a kind of melancholy amusement that the archive is a museum of dreams. every formula, every line of ink is someone trying, hoping, believing that the rules of the universe might bend if you just got the proportions right. If you fasted long enough, chanted loud enough, waited for the right eclipse, and that's what makes it so human. Because behind every absurd recipe and risky potion was a person someone sick or aging or afraid. Someone who just wanted to be strong a little longer. Someone who hoped that a tiny bottle of mercury might carry them beyond the horizon. You blow gently on the edge of one page and it stirs fluttering like a breath across centuries. The ink glints faintly as if the mercury in it is still waiting, still ready. You leave the archive with the weight of it all behind your eyes, not just the danger of mercury, but the poetry of it. The way it shimmers like a promise and kills like a curse. And the way people, despite it all, kept trying. You step out of the archives and into a marketplace, ancient and alive with clamor. There are no tourists here, just dusty sandals, slow fans turning lazily overhead, and the sticky perfume of dried herbs and rain-wet clay. Baskets brim with roots you can't name. Crickets chirp from tiny bamboo cages. And at the far end of the street, nestled between a lacquer repair stall and a tofu cart, sits a small, discreet apothecary booth. You know what you're looking for. A faded wooden sign swings above the awning essences of immortality. A little on the nose, sure, but subtlety isn't the point when you're hawking eternal life. Behind the counter, a thin man with 3 teeth and an impressive braid waves you over. He's surrounded by bottles, small ones, stoppered with wax and labeled in cramped brushwork. The glass glints. The labels read like riddles. Phoenix's breath still soul water. Silver blossom tears. You recognize them for what they are. Euphemisms for mercury concoctions dressed up to sound like miracles. And they're selling, slowly but steadily. Here's the thing, even after centuries of evidence, after emperors died, foaming at the mouth, after tombs leaked poison into the soil, people kept drinking mercury. Not everyone, but enough. In rural towns and whispered cults and back rooms of tea houses where the candles flicker and the laws don't quite reach. Why? Well, it turns out that human hope is a lot stronger than scientific consensus. Especially when that hope is bottled, blessed, and promised to cure not just disease, but aging, forgetting, despair. One woman at the stall points to a little vial labeled Quicksilver of Vital Breath. The apothecary explains gently that it should be taken only during a red moon, ideally after eating nothing but rice and mushrooms for 3 days. It flushes out the shadows, he says. It clears the fog from your years. She buys it. You don't say anything. You just watch. Historians still argue whether this continued use of mercury was pure ignorance or a conscious choice, a kind of cultural momentum too strong to stop. Some say it was desperation, people with no access to modern medicine, clinging to whatever hope the past offered. Others see it as a form of inherited belief passed down like a family recipe, long after the ingredients turned lethal. It wasn't just in China either. In 18th century Europe, mercury was prescribed for syphilis, and yes, people got worse. Fast. In India, certain Ayurvedic traditions used mercury-based rasa preparations for spiritual elevation. In Victorian England, mercury was sold as a cure for everything from constipation to melancholy. So if you're imagining this as just an ancient Chinese oddity, think again. Mercury has global appeal, apparently. Across continents, across centuries, people stared into that silver shimmer and thought, yes, that looks like hope. Back in the stall, the apothecary notices your gaze. He picks up a small bottle, uncorks it, and dips a brush inside. On a scrap of paper, he paints a single flowing symbol, Shu longevity. The mercury gleams in the strokes, heavy and hypnotic. He hands it to you with a wink. You don't drink it, but you hold it and you feel the centuries in its weight. That's the thing about mercury, it's not just an element, it's a metaphor. For the things we chase even when they hurt us, for beauty that deceives, for the seductive promise that maybe, just maybe this time it'll be different. The crowd moves on. The sun dips behind a tiled roof, and you're left in the golden light of early evening holding a tiny bottle full of shimmering regret. You slip the bottle into your sleeve and step away. It clinks softly like a clock ticking backward. You're standing at the water's edge now. It's night, deep, velvety, hush quiet. The moon is silver and full, its reflection pooling across the surface of a wide, slow-moving river. And just beneath that glow in your imagination, at least the water begins to thicken. It doesn't splash anymore. It glides. Becomes mercury. Not really, of course, but the image is irresistible. Silken and silent, the liquid flows like thought, like time itself. And for thousands of years, people saw exactly this and thought, that's it. That's what eternity looks like. They didn't know what you know now about neurons and neurotoxins, about how mercury can eat through your organs and lodge itself in your bones like a ghost that won't leave. They didn't understand vapor inhalation or methylation or the quiet, awful erosion of thought, but in a way that ignorance was tender. Because in mercury they saw possibility. Alchemists thought it was the first metal, the prima materia, the divine fluid that connected all things. They believed that if you could just refine it spiritually, chemically, morally, it would reveal the secret architecture of the universe. And who doesn't want that? You sit by the riverbank and recall a few final curiosities. Did you know that ancient texts sometimes described mercury as having a soul? That it was seen as alive, restless, even mischievous? One poem from the Tang dynasty calls it the laughing mirror of heaven. Another describes it slipping away like a fox when pursued. Historians still debate whether those phrases were poetic metaphor or genuine belief. But that's the beauty of it. It doesn't matter. The myth became the medicine. The dream became the dose. And in some corners of the world, it still is. You think about all those hands across centuries that reached for mercury gently, reverently. The court doctors, the monks, the old herbalist with cracked fingernails. You think about the emperors who drank it by the spoonful. The tombs that still leak it into the ground. The scrolls that still shimmer with its ink. And you think about now. About how much of history is just people trying to outrun the ending. Grasping for permanence in a world made of change. And how beautiful and tragic that chase really is. You lie back on the grass looking up at the same moon those ancient stargazers once watched. Its light still and silvery feels older than language. Quieter than sorrow. Brighter than logic. Somewhere beneath you, deep in the earth, mercury still flows through tombs and dreams. And you just, for tonight, let yourself imagine it means something. You let it shimmer. You let it go. Now take one last breath in. Let it travel slowly through your chest, your ribs all the way down to your toes. Hold it there for just a moment, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of this strange, glimmering history slip away. The emperors are long gone. The scrolls are rolled in silent. The bottles emptied or buried. Mercury, for all its shimmer, could never grant what it promised. But maybe it helped people feel like they mattered, like they were doing something to hold back the dark. That desire was universal. And now here you are, centuries later, lying in your own quiet room. The world is still strange. The questions are still many. But the night, it's gentle now. The fan hums. The blankets rise and fall with each breath. You're safe here. No toxic potions, no urgent quest for eternal life. Just the steady rhythm of your body saying you're alive, and that's enough. Let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts slow like mercury cooling in a still dish. No more rivers to cross tonight. Only sleep to drift into. Softly, silently. See you in the next dream.
You